The farmhouse in rural Indiana stood quietly at the edge of the woods, a place where generations had lived in peace. But one winter night, the peace shattered. The family began hearing faint whispers in the dark, low murmurs that seemed to travel through the walls. At first, they laughed it off as wind or the creaks of an aging home. But soon the whispers grew sharper, clearer. They weren't random sounds anymore. They were words, and the voices were calling their names. The youngest child woke screaming, claiming someone had whispered right into his ear. Night after night, the family huddled together, unable to sleep, listening to the voices grow stronger. Fear settled into the walls of the house as the parents realized something unseen had entered their lives. What once felt like home was no longer safe, but they had no idea how dark things were about to become. Soon, it was no longer just voices. The house itself began to turn against them. Doors slammed violently with no wind, lights flickered until bulbs burst, and furniture shifted across the floor as if shoved by invisible hands. The children's toys moved on their own, rolling toward them as though pushed by some unseen force. The youngest child cried that cold hands had grabbed his wrist in the night, leaving him trembling though no marks appeared. The mother began to feel watched everywhere she went, the air heavy and suffocating. Sleep became impossible. For every night, the disturbances worsened. The whispers that once hid in shadows grew bolder, echoing through the halls like a warning. The family could no longer deny it. This wasn't a trick of imagination, nor the quirks of an old home. It was something sinister. Out of desperation, they turned to their church, praying someone could explain the darkness overtaking their home. The priest arrived quietly, carrying his Bible and holy water, his face already shadowed with unease. He entered the farmhouse, and the moment he crossed the threshold, he felt the weight of something unnatural. A coldness hung in the air, not the chill of winter, but something that pressed on the chest, thick and suffocating. He prayed aloud as he walked from room to room, yet the whispers only grew louder. Shadows seemed to stretch and flicker unnaturally across the walls, dancing out of rhythm with the candlelight. In the daughter's bedroom, he stopped abruptly, clutching his cross as he felt the full force of the presence. His voice trembled as he declared this was no ordinary haunting. "This is something darker," he whispered to the parents. He left shaken, warning that what had taken root here was more than a restless spirit. It was a force that sought control. The family's fear deepened. They weren't just haunted, they were being hunted. Days later, the eldest daughter, once gentle and kind, began to change. Her eyes grew hollow, and her behavior turned violent. She lashed out at her siblings, screaming words no one understood. At night, she muttered in Latin, a language she had never studied, her voice layered with tones that weren't her own. Her body convulsed without reason, her strength unnatural, throwing grown men to the floor. Sometimes her eyes rolled back, leaving only the whites as she hissed like a wild creature. The whispers in the house now seemed to flow directly through her, filling the rooms with voices. Her parents watched helplessly as their daughter slipped further from their grasp, her laughter turning cruel, her presence unbearable. It was no longer just haunting, it was possession. The family understood now that they were in a battle not with the living, but with something ancient, malevolent, and merciless. The priest returned, accompanied by fellow church members, determined to perform a blessing to rid the house of its evil. Candles were lit, prayers echoed, and holy water was sprinkled in every corner. For a moment, hope flickered, but the entity was not about to leave quietly. As the prayers grew louder, the house shook violently. Crosses ripped from the walls, crashing to the floor. Windows shattered, spraying shards across the room. The possessed daughter levitated before their eyes. Her body lifted and twisted unnaturally before crashing down in a scream that did not belong to her. The priest pressed forward, but every step seemed resisted by unseen hands pushing him back. The blessing ended in chaos, with the house in ruins and faith shaken. Instead of retreating, the darkness roared louder than ever. The whispers had become guttural growls, promising vengeance. The family knew they had lost this round. The church, now fully convinced of the severity, authorized a complete exorcism. At midnight, under heavy storm clouds, the ritual began. The girl was restrained to her bed, thrashing violently, her voice a chorus of many, some deep, some shrill, all mocking the prayers being spoken. As the priest began reading from the Roman ritual, the temperature in the room plummeted. Frost formed on the windows, shadows crept up the walls, and the smell of sulfur filled the air. Every prayer seemed to provoke the entity further. The girl's back arched, her eyes blackened, and her screams rattled the very house. Yet the priest did not stop. Holy water burned her skin, and she roared in pain, speaking secrets about the priest's past no one else could know. The war had begun, and it was not only for the girl's soul, but for the entire family trapped in that cursed home. The battle raged for hours, the family clinging to one another in fear as the priest pressed on. The entity grew bolder, mocking God, and laughing at every word of scripture. The girl's body twisted unnaturally, bones cracking with sounds too sharp to bear. At one point, she broke free of her restraints, throwing herself against the wall with such force the plaster cracked. The priest demanded the demon reveal its name, and in a guttural roar, it obeyed, filling the room with hatred. The name alone made the air tremble. Once spoken, the demon threatened to destroy them all, promising they would never escape its reach. The walls bled with dark streaks, and the family collapsed in tears, begging for mercy. The priest, sweat pouring down his face, knew the end was near. One last push was needed, or the girl, and perhaps all of them, would be lost forever. Then, as the first light of dawn broke through the shattered windows, silence fell. The priest uttered the final prayer, his voice hoarse but steady. The girl let out one last piercing scream before collapsing, limp and still. For a long moment, no one moved, fearing she was gone. Then, with trembling breaths, she opened her eyes, her voice soft and weak, but her own again. The house, once filled with growls and whispers, was quiet. The family embraced her, but the joy was haunted by what they had witnessed. Though the exorcism was over, the scars remained. Visitors later claimed the farmhouse still felt heavy, that in the dead of night, faint whispers could be heard. Some swore they saw shadows lingering in the corners, waiting. The family eventually left, unable to bear the memories. Yet locals still believe the darkness never truly left that place. It only waits for another chance.